Welcome to the Laney Photography Department's video on metering and bracketing. We can't do anything without sun. We actually only see about 45% of what it puts out. The rest is UV and ultraviolet, but that's what we use to take pictures. We've been starting our work now with making decisions about ISOs. Many of you have seen this chart. Full sun we use 100 or 200. When it starts to get dim, 400, 800. When we start getting inside and light gets really dark, we go up even higher. We've talked about using our apertures to allow light to come into the sensor. A large f-stop number is a small hole. A small f-stop number is a large hole. We've talked about shutter speeds and what they can do for us. Very slow shutter speeds at the bottom can create blur or trails. Fast shutter speeds at the top can stop action, and we learn how to manage everything in between. We get an exposure by using a gray card. We turn on our light meter, we come in close to the gray card, we fill the frame with the gray card. We don't have a bunch of stuff on the sides. It does not have to be in focus. Okay? It doesn't matter if your color is weird. We're just looking at a tone. And we can set our aperture, set our ISO, and then we can move the shutter dial to get that meter to go where we want it to go to decide on the shutter speed. Or we can set our ISO, we can set our shutter speed, and then we can look at this and look at our meter and spin our aperture dial to come to terms with an aperture. We don't have a gray card, we look for neutral tones. Remember, we've talked about using brick. It's not a bad neutral tone. Or a lawn. We set our ISO, we set our aperture based on technically what we want to do, and then we can measure off of this to get a shutter speed. Or we can use a calibration target. Here's a calibration target. It makes a really good description of a really nice exposure. You can see that gray is beautiful. The black on the edges is good. The black detail on the smoker is really good. There's detail in the white section. The brights have detail. It's a really nice exposure. But when you're reading this thing, you come in close and you fill your frame. You don't want all that other stuff showing. You just want the target. Doesn't have to be in focus. Okay? You're just measuring tones. And interestingly enough, this is what the histogram ends up looking like. This one in the middle here is our gray tone. On the far right is the white tone, and you can see it's a kind of a white with a tone to it, like a very light gray. White would be over here. The dark tone is like a charcoal color. Blacks would be way over here. But you can see this is pretty well centered. Black for the black part of the target, gray for the gray part of the target, white for the white part of the target. This is a pretty good exposure. It's off by about 1/6 of a stop, but pretty good. I could live with that. Now we're going to talk about making brackets. These are aperture brackets. So what we do is we set our ISO at 800 because it's overcast. And you can see I've shot at a 5.6. Now I've shot at an f8. Now I've shot at an f11. So in theory, I would read my card in this light. I would assume an ISO of 800. I would fix a shutter speed of about a 1/60th. That was arbitrary. And my main exposure would be an f8. I want to make a bracket. So I would open up one stop to 5.6, and you can see it's brighter. I can stop down to f11, a smaller hole, and it lets in less light, so it's darker. And this method comes in handy when you're trying to shoot something that's important to you, and you want to make sure you get a good exposure. So you go with what you think will work here. That's what we read in the card. And then, just for insurance, we overexpose by a stop and underexpose by a stop. That is an aperture bracket. 5.6, f8, f11. Notice that the ISOs don't change. The shutter speeds don't change. Okay? Now we're going to make a shutter speed bracket, and you'll notice that the ISO is still 800. It's still the same kind of a light, and you can see I've done an f9 at a 1/60th of a second, and now I've done ISO 800 at a 1/125th of a second, which is twice as fast. And then I've done an exposure, sorry about the graphic, at ISO 800 f9 at 1/250th of a second. So in theory, my main exposure would have been f9 at 1/125th of a second. I want to make sure I got it right, so I overexposed by a stop at 1/60th of a second. I underexposed by a stop at 1/250th of a second. And this is what it looks like. You will notice the ISO is 800, 800, and 800. The aperture is f9, f9, and f9. These don't change. The only thing that changes is your shutter speed. 1/125th is my hero, so to speak. Underexposed is 1/250th, twice as fast. Underexposed is 1/60th, twice as slow. That is a shutter speed bracket, just depending upon what it is you need. If you're trying to stop motion, or you're trying to get a blur, or you're trying to get a certain amount of depth of field, you'll make choices between an aperture bracket and a shutter speed bracket. Thank you for your kind attention.